have a finance job opening at our nonprofit, and one of our board members plans to apply for this position. As the executive director who has to work with this board member, I have some concerns. How can I fairly do interviews given this inherent power dynamic that exists? If I decide that this person is not right for the job, then what happens and how will that impact our future working relationship? Do you have any suggestions on how to handle this delicate situation?
Yikes. This is a super ugly question to answer, isn't it?
It
Because,
is. It's sticky.
yeah. So I think so. My first instinct was like maybe you need to have a conversation with your board chair before anything else happens to let the board chair know that this situation exists. Because it seems to me, I mean, first, okay, let me just start here. Congratulations. You are obviously doing a really, really good job because in a situation where somebody that's on the board who sees what the board sees wants to join staff says that you're doing a fantastic job, says that you're doing really, really good work, and they feel comfortable enough to make that move from a position where they have literally no responsibility, or maybe literally they do have responsibility, but use none of their responsibility to something where they do have responsibility. That says that you're probably in a pretty good position. So congratulations on that. But the you're right about that power dynamic being really, really uncomfortable, because then you're sort of in a no-win situation. If you do hire that person's going to have to 100% resign from the board. So you can't have those two jobs. You can't be on the board. Well, you shouldn't be on the board and be the finance position, right? It's your organization. That doesn't make any sense. And if they don't get the job, they're still on the board. So maybe the solution is to talk to your board chair and say, if you're serious about this from this position, I need you to resign from the board before you apply, so that there's no difficulty in that situation. And if this person really super believes that they're the best person for the job and they really, really want that job and they recognize that they're going to need to resign from the board anyway to take the job, maybe they will say yes to that. And that will sort of solve the power dynamic problem, because then you're no longer interviewing a board member for a staff position. You're interviewing a human for a staff position, which might be an easier thing to do. If that's not the case, which is why I thought maybe the board chair should be involved. If you can't get that person to resign from that board position to resign from the board position before they apply for the position on staff, I think that's your answer. That's that no, you don't want that person to, you're just going to dismiss that person out of hand. And then that's something that the board needs to be able to handle, understanding that that's just happened. In my practice, I've never seen this. Have you ever seen this exact scenario, Stacey?
I have.
You
And
have? Okay.
yes. And interestingly, to your point, the board member actually did resign. This particular organization had a policy in place that if a board member were ever to, like, they literally had something proactively, and I'm sure there's some story about why that exists, but I actually think that's a super smart idea, because this happens in the sector more than people ever talk about. Usually not for a mid-level management or a upper level management. Usually it's like a board member moves into an ED role.
Mm-hmm.
But I know of an organization that did this. So they had the policy. So the board member knew they had to step off and resign, and ended up getting hired at this organization and has done marvelously well, but it's been kind of fascinating listening to the finance person talk about how his eyes have been opened now to how difficult and complex like nonprofit finances are. Particularly, this organization gets a lot of government grants, so a lot of like tracking and coding and just all of this stuff that people don't have to worry about in a for-profit finance position. But overall, it's working really well. So I think it can work. But I agree with you. I absolutely would recommend that there either be a proactive policy put in place that if board members choose to, apply for some position, that prior to that, they have to resign from the board. And another thing, though, I still think is important, even if you have that policy, is to think about if you can truly be objective as the executive director in that recruiting process. Because I'm going to speak for myself, but if I were in this position, I would be thinking a lot about the board member's performance, all the things about this person before they apply. And maybe I've had my own judgments, good, bad, or indifferent, about this person. So I think this may be a good opportunity for an executive director to also pull in perhaps a couple of people, not fellow board members, because they're not going to be objective either, but perhaps, someone like you, Andy, that's got finance background and expertise, that they could say, hey, Andy, will you volunteer, an afternoon of your time to come in and help us think through, here's the lay of the land of our organization. Here's what we're, looking for, and maybe ask some of the tougher questions, or ask some of the questions that I may have blinders on. So I think there's also an opportunity to perhaps kind of add a couple of, additional outside expertise to the process to help make it more objective, because I do think it's really, really tough in a situation like this to not kind of walk into it with some kind of baggage in your head about this person.
I think that's true of any hire, when you're hiring somebody, and that any internal person is applying for it in addition to external persons, right? That's the same scenario. And I don't know that, I don't know that. I mean, in some cases, yeah, the internal person has baggage, and we see that with ED positions, right? So the old ED leaves, and then the board has to select a new ED, and inevitably there's a slate of candidates, sometimes internal as well as external candidates, and the boards, that baggage you bring with you, that's that work experience and ethic and who you are as a person, that the board's going to take that into consideration when they decide whether or not they're going to elevate somebody to that ED position. So I don't know that that's a bad thing. I do like your idea of bringing in someone who may, especially if it's if you want to have sort of a disinterested third party that can ask specific questions. I don't think that's a bad idea, especially if it's a technical position that you don't feel comfortable asking questions about. That's not a bad idea. We've brought in, frequently you can bring in a board member to be on the selection committee. And this is pretty common, right? The ED is hiring a new top financial person, and so they'll have the treasurer as part of the interview panel. So
yeah, I think that's super smart. And I've seen, it seems like finance is one of those positions that happens a lot in, as well as development directors, because the development directors will be working so closely with the board. I think the key for board members who are listening to this is to always remember your ED still makes the decision. So you may serve on that panel, or you may provide your insight and ask questions, but the end of the day, it's the ED's decision. So like it or not, they get to make that decision. You're just sort of helping the process. So
nonprofit governance,
nonprofit answers,
nonprofit board, nonprofit management,
nonprofit marketing, nonprofit resources.
The Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits presents Nonprofit Everything, the podcast about everything nonprofit, with your host, Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I'm Andy Shurick. I'm here with my fantastic and really smart co-host, Stacey Wedding. And today we have several really interesting questions, as well as an expert, guest expert today, which is always good because it's just not Stacey and me talking. Today's episode, or as all episodes are, is presented by the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. One of the best ways to support the podcast is to join the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits. There's lots of good and member benefits. I'd recommend that if you like the podcast and you like what we're doing, the best way that you can support us is by becoming an and member. The second best way you can support us is by asking us a question. So the way the podcast works is people send us questions. Stacey and I do our best to not embarrass ourselves by answering them. And when we would embarrass ourselves, we just go and find a guest expert that can actually answer the question properly. And new for this, from starting from now until we run out, every time somebody sends us a question, if you include your address, I will send you a Nonprofit Everything sticker suitable for sticking on things. So make that your incentive. See if you can get a sticker. Send us a good question, I'll send you a sticker. Heck, send us a bad question, I'll send you a sticker. And with that, here we go. We are a small nonprofit with limited bandwidth. I'm wondering if it is okay to include our end-of-year letter inside our Christmas card. It would save us time to just do one mailing instead of two.
Well, I mean, it's okay, but it's not desired. Like, it's not your preferred choice, right? So that's my answer on this. Like, I just want to sort of go, don't do it. I'm a believer that there 2 touch points is always better than one. Like, and you could use this as 2 touch points. I know that it's time, it's extra time, it's extra money. I get that. And yet, we're in the season, this time of year is the busiest time of year for charitable giving, especially in a year of tragedy that we've seen. So I would hate to see you miss out. Like, I think there's 2 touch points, one that's truly like more of a stewardship opportunity, and one, assuming the end of year letter is an ask or appeal letter, one that's an opportunity to maybe ask for something else, but you sort of, just because it's the right thing to do, say thank you and like holiday wishes, which, side note, I'm hoping the person who wrote this is thinking of holiday versus Christmas, because I know people have different takes on this, but I just think we have to be, as we're thinking about inclusion more these days, thinking of people of all different backgrounds and faiths. So, but I absolutely think both of these serve 2 different purposes. So keep them separate.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So I agree with you on making sure that you're inclusive when you talk to your donors, but it kind of depends on your nonprofit too, right? So I don't know that.
Oh,
right.
Good point.
I think it's totally legitimate to send a Christmas card if that's who you are. I don't know that that's. I mean, I don't know. I don't get offended by much. But that's me. But here's my willfully showing my ignorance on this. And I readily acknowledge that I'm not your typical donor. So what is the point of all of these things? Because I promise you, every piece of holiday mail from a nonprofit that I get goes directly into the trash. Like, I don't open anything.
You don't?
What's in there? Like, I don't want a pre-printed Christmas card that says, I just don't care. It's like, it has no value to me whatsoever. It's not customized to me other than it's got my name printed on the front of it. It's never anything that gives me information about what the nonprofit's doing. Like that end of year letter, totally. The end of year letter, I think, is really interesting. And if it's an organization that I care about, that I'm invested in, I want to see what they have to say. But that other piece, I'm wondering what's the return on that thing? What's the point of it?
But here's my pushback. I think maybe you're just not getting the right pieces. Maybe the organization sending these to you are not, because yes, there's ones that I look at and I go, yeah, this is a mass mailing, or, oh, I've never donated to you before, and I'm on your mailing list that you purchased from somewhere, and I'm just rolling my eyes. I said that just the other night. I was like rolling my eyes, just like, okay, not even opening it up. So there's those. But organizations I've donated to and have a relationship with, I am curious to see what's inside there, because I've seen it done well, right? Like, I've seen it where you have a card that there's a personal note inside, or that says, I just, this is at this time of year, like your gift this past year, I just want to tell you helped us do X, Y, Z. And it's like a personalized thing, versus an annual appeal letter that certainly shares some of that in a bigger spectrum, but it just feels less personalized. So I like that little extra TLC from organizations. It just makes me feel so good. Like, I mean, and I think about Valentine's Day in particular. This time of year, it feels a little like obligation or expected that nonprofits do it, which I don't love that. But like Valentine's Day, there's a few organizations that just do the most clever things for Valentine's Day that are, you know, a homemade card from one of the kids they serve or whatever it is. Like, and I like put these things on my refrigerator. So you and I are super opposite of this, but I'm telling you, there's softies out there like me who like it.
I'm gonna take your word for it. 'Cause, I mean, maybe, and I think you're right that maybe I'm just I mean, it could be just sort of the causes that I spend money on too. Is that I don't spend a lot of money on children's charities. That's just not what I'm interested in. So like I don't get that kind of thing. Instead, I'll get like a window envelope, right, with like my name cut off at the end because it's too long. So the likelihood that there's anything personalized in it is zero. I mean, maybe I should start opening. Maybe I'm making some poor development person really sad because they're writing these heartfelt notes to me that I'm not responding to, and maybe I should just be more sensitive to it.
Well, okay, so I'm also a nerd. So I'm going to say when I'm not wearing my donor hat, I'm wearing my consultant hat. And so I look at these things just out of curiosity to see how they're approaching them, right? I literally have this file I keep of like cool ideas that nonprofits are using that is just that I go, gosh, that was really well done. And I like literally just want to, I'm not, you know, it may have nothing to do with me being a donor or not, but like, I just want to like give them a pat on the back and say, you did that right. Like you did such like a cool, you know, that was such a, you know, out of the box way of handling it. So I don't know. It's kind of for me a little morbid curiosity, but I will say like the window envelopes are the ones that get trashed. It's the ones that maybe look like someone hand wrote something to me that, I mean, when I get something that's handwritten on the envelope, oh, I'm totally opening that. And I'm going to guess you would too.
No, because it's not been postmarked. It's got the cheap nonprofit postage stamp on it. And it came from Omaha, Nebraska. And it's like clearly written by somebody who's written my name on written names on 10,000 things today. Their arm is so tired that the letters have to be like, I don't open those either. Okay. So here's what I'm going to do. From now on till the end of the year, I'm going to open everything and I'm going to just put them in piles and I'm going to see if there's anything interesting in them. We could talk about this one after the first.
Yeah, this is going to be like a podcast in the new year that we need to talk about because we're going to chip away at that hard exterior of yours. So.
It's a candy shell inside with a soft exterior, I think. And through the magic of podcasting, we now have Greg Wilken, who is our kind of go-to HR guy. Greg is the founder and CEO of Endunamo Consulting, provides human resources consulting to small business and nonprofits. And we are delighted to have Greg come and help us answer this one.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's great to be on the show again. I love what you and Stacey are doing. I'm a faithful listener, and I have an opportunity to participate and contribute. I'm thrilled. So, thank you for the invitation.
Of course. And so here's the question. This one, Stacey and I were immediately out of our depth. I am a new board chair, and I was wondering how to keep track of the executive director's employee file. Right now, only our ED has access to it, and I'm wondering if that is typical.
Yeah, great question, and be happy to answer it. So what I could do is I'll give you a little background just about the kind of the issue of employment or personnel files in general, kind of lay the foundation, then be happy to answer the question. So personnel files is one of those areas of human resources that's not particularly exciting, but it's very important. And it's one of those things that if you do it correctly, nobody notices, but if you do it incorrectly, sometimes it can get you in trouble. And the last thing you want is to get a request for an employee file, or worse, rare, but you may get audited. And that's not a good time to find out that your personnel files are non-compliant. So doing it right up front is important, and it saves you trouble down the road. So just a few things about personnel files. There are three general categories of information for a personnel file. First is kind of your employment information, application, performance review, discipline, acknowledgement of the handbook. Second is medical records. And then the third is I-9 forms. And those are, in a good personnel file system, those three categories of information would be kept separately. So that just a little foundation. One other thing to mention is that there is a statute in the state of Nevada, as a lot of states have, that allows employees access to their personnel files. Two things to keep in mind about that. The first, and employees really have kind of two rights under that file. They have the right to inspect personnel file upon request, and then they have a right to be provided copies of what's in the file. So it's good practice to maintain good personnel files. It's also required under Nevada law that you have them and make them available to employees. So this question, it's a kind of a unique perspective on it, just because of the way nonprofits are usually organized. And that is, the executive director, the CEO, whoever the senior officer is, reports typically to the board, and all of the other employees of the organization, if there are any, would report to the executive director. So the personnel file of the ED is a little bit different. There are a few things that this particular board chair could do. He or she could have, if this organization has anybody who is responsible for human resources, if they have an HR director, an HR manager, or somebody who has the responsibility of human resources, they could maintain the ED's file with all of the other personnel files. The second place it could be kept is the executive director could maintain his or her own file, because under Nevada law they have a right to see it. There shouldn't be anything in it that is private. So the ED could maintain it, and the board chair could then have access to it. Or thirdly, the board chair could actually keep a copy of or keep the actual file, him or herself. There wouldn't be any legal issue with that. There wouldn't be an HR issue. That would really raise more kind of an administrative issue, because it might be located somewhere other than the nonprofit's physical location. Might be a little bit difficult to access it if anybody else on the board wanted to see it, but that would certainly be acceptable. And and then, as I said, maintaining the kind of the classification of information in that file would be important. So, little background about personnel files, and in this particular case, some options for the board chair as far as maintaining it and having access to it.
So my understanding, and obviously know way more about this than I do, but my understanding was that the employment information that was not private, but that would be like performance reviews, any write-ups, any information about sort of the things that go in the employee file about the employee's work, are things that the supervisor typically has access to, but the supervisor in most cases shouldn't have access to medical records and the I-9, like the social security number and the information on the I-9. So is that, when the executive, I think it's probably the same for any business where the top executive, if there's not an HR person to kind of hold on to that information, that information would probably, like the I-9 and the medical records, would probably stay in the ED's filing cabinet, locked filing cabinet. And then the performance-related HR information, performance-related employee information would be something that the supervisor in this case, which would be the board chair or the board nominating committee, or if the board has some sort of executive review committee, might be responsible for hanging on to that. You can make it the responsibility of the board secretary to keep track of that kind of documentation. Am I understanding that right, or am I wrong?
Nope. That's correct. And again, in this case, because it's somewhat of a unique reporting relationship, at least unique to the nonprofit world, as opposed to a for-profit company, where the ED reports to the board chair as opposed to reporting to somebody more senior within the organization. But the board chair in this case, and in fact, the entire board in that respect, because the executive director, I'm assuming, reports to the board, anybody on the board would have the right to view any information in this employment file, including medical information. Now, that's not to say it's a good idea to share medical information with the entire board. It might be just the board chair who sees it, but would, as you mentioned, would want to make sure that that information is kept more secure and more confidential than the personnel information in the file, the performance review, the application, commendations, other things related to that. So it may be that the executive director maybe requests a medical leave of absence, maybe has a workers' comp claim. There may be medical information in the executive director's file that the board chair would want to keep as part of the overall personnel file. Just would need to keep it separate from the personnel, the other employment-related information, and take steps to make sure that anybody who sees that would know that it's confidential and take steps to protect it.
Yeah, that terrifies me a little, because I think the reason that the reason that you don't usually mix medical information with performance information is because in the event that you're sued for wrongful termination or there's some problem, that if you don't even have to prove that it happened, but you prove that, they knew that I was sick, which is why I was terminated. Right. And if that information is separate, if the board has that information, that's a pretty plausible argument in an employment suit, is that the reason they fired me is because they knew I was sick. So I guess in that if that's the case, because nonprofits are different, that means you would definitely have to strengthen any kind of performance review or any kind of termination to make sure that you had sort of rock solid documentation on exactly why that happened, and that you would need to find some way to prove that you could plausibly deny that any kind of medical information or anything was part of that decision.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You want to make sure that it is that information is segregated, so to speak, from the other information. But the reality is that if an executive director, CEO is having attendance problems that become a reason for the termination, that in and of itself, the medical assuming that the attendance problems maybe are a result of a medical condition, the attendance by itself, if it's not protected leave, could be a reason for discipline or termination. And the board chair wouldn't necessarily have access to the medical information, but they would have access to the attendance record. So one example where medical information would be kept separately, but the result of that medical information would be part of the personnel file and could be the cause of discipline, depending on the circumstances. So it's just an example where the information itself would need to be kept separate, but the results of that information would not necessarily have to be cordoned off and kept completely confidential.
Yeah, that sounds. And as like keeping track of CEO or executive director attendance, I know all of the board members listening just started laughing maniacally, because honestly, they have no idea whether or not that person's at their desk or not, or
sure
they're not. It's like the kind of thing that they just would never have information on. But Yeah, I could see. Yeah, that makes sense to me now. And I'm sure you would counsel anybody that if you're considering terminating somebody, that you need to make sure you've got your ducks in a row, and not accidentally put yourself in risk of immediately being sued after you make that termination.
Correct. Yeah. And then the other issue that I thought about this particular question is the potential scenario where maybe the executive director has had a complaint or complaints from the staff, and those would, if any other employee other than executive director, that might be part of the personnel file. But in this case, if the executive director is the one who's actually maintaining his or her own file, which is certainly a possibility, you'd need to have a separate place for information that might otherwise be in a personnel file, but wouldn't, because the executive director in this case is the one and only person who has access to it. So
yeah,
just another kind of variation on the kind of scenario, because this is somewhat unique.
Greg Wilken, founder and CEO of Endunamo Consulting, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Andy. It's great to talk to you again. Keep up the great work that you and Stacey are doing, and enjoy the holidays.
Thank you. You too.
You made it, and I am cheerleading from the sideline because you made it. You made it to the end of this episode. And God, I was an awful cheerleader, so I didn't even do cheerleading. I hated the cheerleaders, Andy. I'm sure that you as a boy liked the cheerleaders. I hated them in high school.
I liked everybody. I was just friendly. I was that one kid that was just friendly with everybody.
Yeah, I had like cheerleader envy because, they were always the cute girls with all the moves. So anyways, but with that said, I am doing my silly Stacey cheerleading from the side because you made it. If you stuck through it for another episode of Nonprofit Everything, and just appreciate you listening, and really love it when you share this with your colleagues. And that's how we get more engagement and we move up the podcast ratings. And that's always good for just Nevada, for nonprofits that are listening, as well as for ANN, the Alliance for Nevada Nonprofits, that makes this possible.